You're listening to the Bombad Generals.
General?
Hey, welcome to the Bombad Generals. It's your host, Seth, and I'm here with Matt. So excited to have you listen with us. Today, unfortunately, Todd was unable to make it with us again. He's just tired of people just from the holidays. So he's kind of just doing a detox from people.
Before we get too far, I do want to direct people, if you haven't already, listened to our interview with Mike Berry that we released last Friday. I'd say go do so. It was a really good conversation as far as how he approaches Legion. He's a very, very good Legion player. And just getting some of our initial thoughts as far as how we're going to be building lists going into the great unknown that is the new rules and all the changes coming down the pipe. So really good episode. Check it out if you haven't.
So we got a very special episode. Matt and I actually just got done live streaming our game where him and I played against each other, just trying out the new rules with all the previewed articles, seeing what our thoughts were.
Just to lay some ground rules for how we approach the new rules. I think
it's true.
Cover LOS is pretty straightforward. We just said, hey, if the unit leader can't see a defender, they get heavy cover, so that's how we decided to treat that. Pass is pretty straightforward. The big thing was the new climbing rules. So we said climb is one action. You can trigger stuff like Relentless off of it. You can do it twice in a turn, but you cannot force push someone to do a climb. So speed X moves, you couldn't do that. So no scouting, none of that. So that being said, what I was wanting to do was play around a bit with the suppression mechanics, and I had Imperial officers, Darth Vader operative, some T-21 Storms, 3 of those guys, a medic stormtrooper, IRG, and 2 full scouts with the saboteurs. So coming in at 10 acts, my thinking was that I could really use the sabs as a flexible unit to mine stuff in the early game and then use their guns, which they have a lot of, with 2 black each at range 2, kind of more in the late game to shoot some stuff up, use the IRG to protect them, and mostly just kind of get to learn Vader, because I think Empire's still in a really good spot, and I really want a Force user in a lot of my lists, so I wanted to start learning Vader and all of the tricks he has, which, spoiler alert, he's got a ton of good tricks. So that's what I was trying to do. That's what I was looking at. Unfortunately, I didn't get the bid to get all the objectives that, panicking units with Saboteur Mines and Master of Evil would be great at, but still worked out because we played Payload. But before we get into that, Seth, what were you running and what were you trying to do with your list?
Yeah, so I ran a Yoda gunline list, 9 activations at 791 with Yoda, the Clone Commander, a bunch of Phase 1s, Z6s with a Medic, and DC-15 with 3 Barks. And really just my whole process was trying to use the pass mechanic to my advantage with fire supporting the Bark shots, and having Yoda with Jedi Mind Trick to get a 6 suppression turn on a unit in case I needed to utilize a panicking unit for objective scoring.
So what did you think of the pass mechanic broadly in our game? Because I think pretty much every turn you were passing. How much of an impact do you think it had? Every
turn I did have priority, I passed almost. And it helped. It definitely helped. It felt better. Just especially running a 9 act against a 10 act. It felt good going up against Vader, where I only had to deal with Vader at the end instead of multiple activations.
And on the other side of it, I didn't feel like it was too game-breaking the other way, where I was like, man, it's pointless for me to have 10 acts. Like, having the pass is too strong. I never felt that. So overall, I'd say that's, as I kind of expected, like that was a change I really liked. It was subtle, but definitely had an impact and made 9X feel a little less bad, but not like the new hotness necessarily.
Yeah, it definitely felt better as a player. I don't feel like it gave me an advantage against you at all.
It mitigates disadvantage more so than giving an advantage. Now it's a more equal, closer to an equal trade to go from 10 down to 9 and beef stuff up.
Yeah.
Versus before, it was you would go down to 9 and beef stuff up, but you didn't get that little extra bonus. So now you get a little bit of extra bonus, so it's worth thinking about. The other things I think early on for the new rules that we really saw in those first couple turns of posturing was cover and LOS and the movement rules.
Yeah.
So there's a building, like you were jumping up onto a building with some clones, getting out of cover shots, still lining it up. And I think that was a big takeaway from this game and the other game I've played with the new cover rules. It's still very possible to get people out of cover. Like, flanking's still a thing.
Flanking is. I feel like the high ground, the high ground has more of an advantage now than before because you can get easier out of cover shots than being on the same plane.
Yeah, and this was a fortified positions game too, and we were still you're still lining up some open shots. But yeah, it's sort of like, it will be on the 2D surface a little bit harder to get open shots, but still very possible. But opening up easier vertical movement mitigates that somewhat, because then it's going to get a lot easier to see over top of things. Like, I think the big takeaway for me, and I've kind of been saying this already, but you know, if anyone's thinking, oh, there's going to be too much cover, we need to change how we make tables. No, don't overreact and start changing things, right?
No.
Honestly, we're still not great at making really good competitive tables. Like, just keep doing what we were doing before and see how things shake out. Like, I don't think there's too much cover in the game right now.
Yeah, what I felt, one of my biggest takeaways that I loved seeing it, but I hated receiving it, was the climb for Vader.
Yep, it was insane.
It was. There was so many moments where you could just poke in, get a scatter shot or whatever shot you needed, and then poke back out through a giant line of sight blocker, and that just felt bad going up against. To where now you can just, you can do that whenever you want. It's a big buff to Sith that don't have jump.
We were working on the assumption that because of how they word it, that it sounds like a climb is a subset of a move action. That it triggers things that trigger off of move actions, which includes Relentless. That will be one of the first things I'm checking when the new core rulebook comes out. How exactly the climb interactions work in that really detailed, because they didn't... The annoying part about the article, the snippet we saw, is it never mentions action there, so it's very vague how exactly it works. But if you can do things like Relentless or Steady or Charge or whatever off of climbs, or even stuff like Tactical, right? If you get all of those, then probably you won't get Tactical because it calls out standard move. But it's a big buff to, as you say, Sith. It's a big buff to, Han was already looking really good. We talked about that a little bit with Mike. Han is very exciting if you can figure out what to put around him. Pop up, pop down with Steady, like, that's going to be big. Yeah. Right? So that's... And there's even a world, we didn't play it this way, but there's a world where you can do it on a speed X move, and you could force push someone down from heights. I don't think that's how it's going to be. That's why we kind of didn't play it as such, but that could be an even bigger buff to force users. So that's kind of my number one thing to watch for when the new rules come out, because that's kind of the big gray area for me. And
then the fourth aspect of the rule change was the suppression, and honestly that didn't come into play hardly ever, especially with a lot of sabs. It didn't change, I feel like, the play that we had. It was very small in the sense of there was one turn on the payload where the fact that my scout troopers had 4 suppression at the end of the turn meant they were not counting towards my own payload. And I basically had to mitigate that by moving in an extra unit to make up for the lost unit. So like it wasn't game breaking in that one. Of course, there is a world. So the big struggle, I think, for me, and why I still think it might be tough to run SAB units, is they are kind of line of sight blocker dependent. I think the big thing you really want to do as well is you want to get far quickly and then go backwards and mine backwards. Because if you try to mine from the back forwards, you're moving into your own mines. But there was really no terrain to be able to go deep and start mining. But in a world where that does happen,
then when I blow up my mines, instead of it just being to, in this game, what it was to just kill things and to limit Yoda's actions by giving him a lot of suppression, there is a world where I know where your payload's going. On turn 3 or 4, I can set it up that I can just suppress the heck out of your troopers and you can't push your payload. So I think there are definitely times when that could have been a game changer. It didn't happen to be in this game. And especially because even in that scenario, like, you've got Yoda. Yoda's very good with the new suppression rules because he gives a courage 4 bubble. So it takes 9 suppression at the end of the turn to really panic someone, which now actually makes me realize those scouts were not actually panicked because they would have lost the suppression first, but it didn't matter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I think for the suppression part, I didn't really feel it. Like, I didn't have any Inspire in my list, so it didn't really affect me, but it definitely changed my gameplay when attacking you because you only had a Courage 2 bubble instead of a Courage 4, you know? Mm-hmm. So it kind of gave me another tactical layer to think about, but not because of my high Courage for Yoda. It didn't give me a tactical hindrance that I had to play against.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, so for me, I think the jury's still out. I think it's still one of the biggest changes coming out of these rules.
Yeah.
It doesn't change how I think about that. The thing for me that if this change was because they felt like suppression wasn't as meaningful, like it was, I was saying this earlier in our game, suppression, just regular old suppression rules were still incredibly meaningful in this game.
Very much so,
when
yeah.
it came to limiting actions on Core and then eventually on Yoda. Like, suppression was already quite a useful tool. So
yeah, and it still is.
And it still is, exactly. It's just even more so now. I still don't think you want to build your entire list around it, especially around making suppression, but I think you definitely have to build with the thing in mind that you might come up against someone who is really trying to do a big suppression bomb. And I think the main one is, again, Vader. He's really good regardless, and a big Master of Evil play is going to mess up your army if you're not prepared for it.
Yes. It's definitely...
Or a Yoda with 6 suppression in 1 turn is going to mess you up. Because usually it's only 1 or 2 units that really matter, right?
Yeah, the Inspire keyword is definitely up in stock, and so I would make sure you try to have Inspire or just have a high Courage commander.
Yeah, and especially with Vigilance, lead by example didn't really see a lot of play before because it was kind of like the third option maybe behind 2 cheaper options, Vigilance and Improvised Orders. And sometimes you would have to take Underworld Connections depending on what kind of list you're trying to run. Now you probably aren't taking Vigilance anymore, so it kind of freed up some of those cheap command card slots to take Lead by Example. And maybe you take it over Improvise, maybe you don't. But it's good. It has a lot of uses. Now, Order Control is still very important with that Inspire, right?
Yes,
and Order Control... If one of the big things in our game was late, I was able to get the officer to go before a stormtrooper to inspire off a suppression, allow them to double move, stop a payload, right? So that's regular old suppression rules, but same thing goes for the new panic rules, right? If your officer goes before the unit is suppressed, and they can't inspire that off, and they get suppressed later, then all your Inspire is doing nothing. So once again, what was good before, Order Control, still good.
There's definitely a tough timing window, especially with the Galactic Civil War commanders, or Galactic Civil War officers, because you want to get your dodges and your aims out early to either take a hit or give a hit, but now you want them to go a little later so that they can take the suppression. So it's definitely how... It makes the timing a little bit more complicated for when you want those officers to activate or not activate.
I think in the early turns, you're probably still going early with them and just clearing. You're just kind of sifting through suppression, clearing as much of it as you can so it doesn't build up. Because really the big suppression bombs, the panic changes, they're not really going to impact things until the very last turn. And then in that very last turn... holding that suppression for late is probably much more important than getting an extra aim or a dodge out. Versus in the early turns, I think you just go earlier, get those aims and dodges out, clear whatever suppression you have, just so it It's basically, it's like weeding. You just kind of get the weeds out, get the suppression out.
Yeah.
Do some maintenance. But yeah, so definitely new rules had a big effect. Changed how we built our lists and changed how we played the game. So I guess the big thing is, do you think Yoda Gunline, and we say Gunline, you did have 3 barks, but Yoda clones with triple barks, do you think it has legs?
Maybe. I'll have to keep playing with it. But I think it has some legs. Definitely. I think my playstyle just has to change a little bit. Yoda Chewie is still one of the best combos in the game, I feel like. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to get away from that.
What were your thoughts on clone medics? Because that's one of the big things I've been looking at as well in Gar list building, with clone medics coming down to 15. How do you think they performed for you?
I really enjoyed them. It gave me that extra oomph for attacking. But mainly I tried to use them to not necessarily heal Yoda, but actually keep my oomph for the attrition war back in. So I always, like what you always tried to take out my heavies. So I always brought my heavies back, or tried to at least.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's what you got to do. Like, people, the medics aren't necessarily for, hey, I'm going to heal Yoda. I'm going to save them till late to heal Yoda. I think the whole point for me when I'm putting them in my list is, hey, you took a shot at my clones. I blanked. Now I'm going to immediately heal that guy back up and take a shot back at you. So I have an extra body. I'm bringing back a body. It's just early snowball, getting that attrition war going.
Yes. So I think they're great. Are they a must-take? I don't think they're a must-take in Republic list, but they're definitely a great tool to go in almost every Republic list out there. For 15 points...
focused on clones, I think.
Yeah.
If you're going like naked core, I still wouldn't take a medic just to heal the Force user, because it's only one heal. Versus, in a rebel list with a bunch of naked core, I would take a medic to heal Luke or whatever.
Yes, especially because you get 2 heals.
Exactly. You pay the 15 points when it's keeping your clone core hitting at full power or close to full power for longer, right? So it's when you want to focus on the clone guns.
Yes, and then one quick tip, I would try to put them in your phase 1s over your phase 2s, because your phase 2s have a lot more points invested into them, so you don't want to invest a lot more points in case they die. When like a phase 2 with a Z6 is 87 points, but a phase 1 with a Z6 and a medic is 89 points, so it's only 2-point difference. So I would try to stick them in your phase 1s over your phase 2s.
Yeah, because if you're sitting there with a 100 plus point core unit, that is a huge target on their back, and it's going to be hard to trade points, right? A lot of competitive games come down to points destroyed, and when you lose an 100-point unit, it's going to be a lot harder to make those points back. Now, 90 points is still tough, but like it's better to even out the costs in this scenario. So I think that's probably good for part 1, and then we'll talk a bit more about our game with the key keywords and the tactical tactics in part 2, so stay tuned for that. Fantasy sports are all the rage these days. When I play, I use Pod Duel. There's a lot of pod races happening every weekend, but I don't want to be tied down to the same racers all season. Set your lineup weekly with Pod Duel. Last week, Al Darbido headlined my team, but this week I'm switching him out for Ben Quadraneros. I'm sure that will work out. Try it today and get a free 10 credit wager when you sign up with our promo code YIPPEE! Now, back to the show. And welcome back. So now it is time for today's top tactical tactic. So TTT. RIP TTO. But for my top tactical tactic, I want to focus on scatter and the scatter shenanigans with force choke and how those work together. Because, I guess disclaimer, I am not an expert. This was one of my first games ever with Darth Vader operative, but it's incredibly powerful, and I think we'll talk more and more about scatter maybe in an upcoming key keyword, because there's a lot of different things you can do with it. It's a great keyword. It's a very contained keyword. It doesn't come up in a lot of attacks. I think it's Vader, Dooku, and bunker buster shells are the only 3 ways you can get it. But essentially it allows you to recohere a unit after you attack. One of the great things about it is it's not dice dependent. We talk a lot about the routes that don't involve rolling dice. So it's whether you blank out or get 2 hits, you are going to recohere that unit. And how that works with scatter is that, in this game, I didn't really want to dive, how that works with force choke. In this game, I didn't really want to dive with Vader because you have Yoda backlining, you've got fire support options. It could go really badly, and if I lose Vader, I'm in a very tough spot. So it's a lot easier to pop out into range 1.5 about, basically 10 inches from the unit leader, who's probably the most forward cohered of that unit. Get to 10 inches, hit them with the blast attack. If you do a wound, great. If you don't, no problem, because then you just pull forward the heavy on the cohesion, force choke the heavy off. So that's why you have to be within 10 inches, because 4 inches on the forward cohesion, and then 6 inches for range 1 for choke. So you do that, choke the heavy, pop back behind line of sight blocking, and increase your range. So you're really staying pretty darn safe, and you're eliminating heavies, which is huge in pretty much any matchup. And I did that, I think, 3 turns in this game. Like half the game of Vader was just choke, choke, choke.
Yes, you killed 3 heavies.
Yeah. One got brought back with the medic. Yeah. And then he died again. But it's big. It's if you can kill the heavy, and even if you leave the rest of the squad and it's 5 guys, the effectiveness of that squad has gone way down. And that not only helps the rest of your army, but that helps your force user like Vader, because that's a lot less firepower coming back at him. He's becoming safer because there's less threat.
Yeah, it's easier to dive with him.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so spend a few turns. Again, I'm a very conservative force user player, so I don't want to dive too early. So in the early turns, weaken them up with just using scatter and choke. And then in the late turns, they don't have much firepower left. You can dive, clean up, swing your lightsaber, do all the fun things that you want to do. So my first real experience playing that felt great. Felt awesome. And that's something I'll definitely be looking to do more of.
Yeah, it definitely helped. Like, the deployment definitely helped you a ton because battle lines, it's really easy just to find that line of sight blocker, get within how many inches did you say?
10 inches, yeah.
Find that line of sight blocker, get roughly around 10 inches, get in there. It's just battle lines helped a ton with that. So if you're looking to go...
And jumping.
And jumping, yes.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to go against Vader on that, specifically Operative Vader, I would watch out for that with battle lines and that whole climb, jump, back and forth. There's a lot of peekaboo from Vader.
Alrighty, and then that takes us to our keyword segment. Seth, what is our keyword of the week?
So our keyword of the week is the keyword Guardian. Some specific units really have this, like Chewbacca, both Gar and Rebel. You have the IRG having this.
Yeah.
And you have the Magna Guards having Guardian. Of course, you have a Steamed Leader upgrade where you can give a bunch of your core and surrounding units Guardian, but don't take that.
And eventually we'll have Boyle in Republic, who gives Guardian 1 to a core unit on a personnel upgrade.
Yes.
So I think as we start off talking about Guardian, a lot of the units you mentioned have Guardian Commander, which in my opinion is vastly different than Guardian. I think
very much.
Pure Guardian is one of my top keywords in the entire game. Versus Guardian Commander is nice, it's good. It has a place in, Yoda Chewie lists, it's very helpful. In Dooku Magnas, it's very helpful, but it's not at all in the same level of utility. So maybe we should start talking with full Guardian. Why is full Guardian so dang good?
Specifically for IRG, it's really good because you bring your white saves, like your scouts, and turn it into red saves. So you can have your scouts live longer, or your officers live longer. Or let's say even your Jedi, like Operative Vader. taking heat off of him is huge.
It's really having that versatility, as you say, because a lot of the time, you're guardianing special forces unit or core units. It kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the medics in GAR, right? It's the purpose of guardian is to redistribute wounds to keep your attrition in a better spot than it would be otherwise, right? So you keep your own heavy hitters firing back on all cylinders. So IRG, they can cycle up the saves to red saves from white saves, or just guardian another red save unit. Chewie kind of does it in a different way, especially in Republic, or especially in Rebels, because usually you're taking wounds off of a unit with better saves than Chewie, and you're putting them on Chewie, who has essentially no save. But it's still good in that instance because Chewie's got 9 wounds. And if you think about it, if you put 5 wounds onto Chewie, you know, you got to play conservative with them, but if that's 5 or 4 wounds that didn't go onto a core unit, then that's really good because that's a dead core otherwise, or that's keeping that core shooting back with more dice, doing more damage, getting ahead in the attrition game, while you're not actually losing firepower despite taking wounds.
Which, like, Guardian Chewbacca plus Reckless Diversion from Han Solo is a great combo, because Chewbacca, you put the Reckless Diversion on a core unit or a unit with a dodge nimble, and then Chewbacca just gives more hits taken away from that unit, and Chewbacca helps that unit live longer. So it's a great tool, little trick right there to use with Chewbacca and Han.
Yeah, there's actually, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but it's a really cool trick that I like. Han, Chewie, and then Rebel Vets plus a Mark II. You play Reckless Diversion, you put it on the Rebel Vets, they coordinate to the Mark II, and you have Chewie and Guardian range. If they shoot the Mark II, you Guardian just enough to ensure that even if you blank out, the Mark II won't die. Maybe it's got 2 wounds left and they force 3 saves. Guardian 2 of those onto Chewie. Let the Mark II, let's say, fail a wound. It's sitting on 1. And then you fire support, because it has a face up. You fire support that Mark II, get a big hit on something, and now they can't shoot it anymore. So Chewie really making your opponent annoyed with all the things he can do. So yeah, Chewie, fantastic. If you are bringing a medic in a Guardian list, I think if you're using Rebel Chewie, you probably aren't medicing back wounds on Chewie just because he has paper saves. I think you use the medic for the saves you do have to roll on your units. So that's, let's say you're guarding off of a Rebel DLT squad. Chewie grabs a couple, you roll 1, they lose a guy. You bring back the guy on the Rebels as opposed to bringing the medics to heal up Chewie. IRG, I think, is a little bit different. Bringing back IRG, they're valuable. That's good. You can do some really, really interesting stuff with wound allocations if you've got multiple medics. Because let's say you've got a 3-man IRG with 1 wound and they lost a guy. You can bring back the extra guy before you have to heal the extra wound. At least in the current rules. This might change. So then you have 2 wounds on the unit, but they're on 2 different guys. You have a full strength unit, which means you can go up and punch someone really hard. So again, a bit of a sidetrack, but things that you can be aware of with those Guardian units. Now, pivoting, Guardian 2, you've played a lot of Yoda Chewie. How would you say Guardian Commander? So, pivoting now, Guardian Commander, you've played a lot of Yoda Chewie. Republic Chewie has Guardian Commander. How is that going to be different in how you play and approach the Guardian keyword than straight up Guardian everything?
Most of the time I keep Chewbacca specifically with Yoda. I'm not normally, like the whole attrition thing we were talking about, Chewbacca's not there for that. Chewbacca is there as a transport for Yoda and to keep him alive. It doesn't come into play as much as a non-commander Guardian works. but it's still useful. One of the things I find it really useful is for high velocity shots into Yoda, where where Yoda has a bunch of dodges. I can't dodge him, so I was like, okay, I'll just Guardian them, and then that gives me wounds on to Chewbacca, where I can keep my 5 wound Yoda alive a lot more. I don't Guardian as much, nor do I Guardian every shot into Chewbacca, but it definitely takes a lot of heat. And it's just a little cushion there for Yoda as time goes on. Now, it doesn't contribute a lot to the army as a whole, but mainly it's just to support that commander. So, like, if you're running Chewbacca with a commander, I'd highly recommend you keep Chewie right there with your commander, especially Yoda. I don't think you bring Chewbacca in with any other commander besides the Chieftain, maybe.
Yeah, if the Chieftain was good, I think you would bring Chewie Chieftain.
Yeah, but you're there to support Yoda because Yoda can carry a game on his back. You're not there to support your army, in my opinion.
And I think it's similar with Dooku Magnas, right? I think in both these instances, the lists where Guardian Commander really shines, what it's doing is it's enabling that commander to be a lot more aggressive and take a lot more of a focused central role than they would otherwise. I mean, regardless, Yoda and Dooku are going to be a main focal point in your army with or without that Guardian, but you can be a little more in your face with those units when you've got that Guardian backing them up, so they can really push more aggressively. Now, I guess to wrap it all up, we've looked at Guardian, we've looked at Guardian Commander. What are your thoughts on Boyle? Have you been doing a lot of list building with him as a Gar main? Do you think when he eventually comes out, you'll really be using him, or you're not sure?
I think I haven't really built a lot of lists around him, but I think he does. I think he definitely has a ton of potential, especially for running pikes. Again, turning those white saves into red saves are huge. The big loss that I don't like is that you can't share other surges during Guardian, and so that's kind of a hurtful thing. So maybe Boyle on like a phase 2 unit where he has his own surge is a little bit more helpful.
Though. That's
it is expensive.
Like,
it is.
And sometimes I've seen them doing Boyle with Protector on a P2, but that unit is so crazy expensive for a unit that's just soaking up a little bit of wounds. Because Boyle's only Guardian 1 too.
Yeah.
Right? That's the thing.
Yeah. You have Scout 1 and Guardian 1. Scout, it doesn't really come into play. Yeah. I personally would probably take a medic over Boyle now.
Yeah, especially if you've got the heavies. So you mentioned surge sharing. Again, this is all framed by current rules. The thing you cannot do during Guardian is clone surge sharing, because the clone keyword says while attacking or defending, and when you are Guardianing, you're doing neither of those. However, Exemplar and Yoda's 3-pip have different wording. They say you can essentially spend those tokens as if they were your own. So if you have Anakin around, or you have Yoda playing Luminous Beings, you can use those surges on defense while Guardianing. So that's an important distinction.
I do think Boyle in an Anakin list is very helpful, especially because you are almost always aggressive with Anakin, especially in the later turns. So taking heat off him is, especially in the later turns, is huge.
I think for me, I don't personally see Boyle being in Guardian range of Anakin himself, but I'm thinking the good thing about Anakin, he's got really good defenses for conventional non-high velocity shots, because he's running with extra dodges. He's got maybe barrier. I'm a believer in barrier Anakin, but maybe you're not running that. He's got surges, so if you're actually rolling defense dice, those clones are pretty tanky. But when high velocity comes into play, especially like snipers, Anakin's not going to help much, and that's where Boyle, I think, can really help, especially since he's only Guardian 1. That's perfect for soaking up sniper shots.
Perfect.
So I think
now
that's
we probably
really
won't see a lot of. Now we probably won't see a lot of snipers coming up in the next meta, just with all the changes. But who knows? They could make a comeback.
Yeah, and that's probably another reason why maybe you just go with another medic.
Yeah,
but we'll see. And by the time that Boyle comes out, there might be other new stuff that's coming out or changing at the same time that kind of changes how we think about him.
And we will talk about it then.
Exactly. So that wraps us up for this episode of the Bombad Generals. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And if you want to check out the game that Seth and I played or skim through it, you can check out the Bombad Generals YouTube channel where that stream is available. An interesting game, I would say, with Gar versus Empire with some kind of unconventional new style lists. So
yeah. So thanks so much for watching.
And stay Gungan.
This has been the Bombad Generals.
Listening to Bombad Generals is not scientifically proven to make you a better Legion player. Side effects may include bad dice rolls, missed triggers, aim losses, bankruptcy, divorce, vomiting, and sudden death. Ask your doctor if Bombad Generals is right for you.